The dim glow of candlelight illuminated the mahogany table where Ethan Wallace sat, his fingers deftly flipping through the contract he'd been fine-tuning all week. The restaurant exuded an air of exclusivity, white tablecloths pressed to perfection, crystal glasses catching the light just so, and servers gliding silently, anticipating every unspoken request. This was his sanctuary, a place where business deals were sealed over filet mignon and merlot. Ethan's reputation was as pristine as the decor around him. In his early 40s, with silver threads woven into his dark hair and a sharp suit tailored to precision, he epitomized success. Yet, beneath the polished exterior, lay a man who had traded connection for control, warmth for efficiency. He didn't notice the young girl at first. She was an anomaly in this environment, a shadow flitting through the periphery of his focus. When she stopped just beside his table, her presence was impossible to ignore. Small and slight, she wore a faded blue jacket, 2 sizes too big, its edges fraying at the cuffs. Her sneakers were worn, their soles nearly detached, and her hair was pulled back into a messy ponytail. But it was her eyes that drew Ethan in, wide, brown, and filled with a raw intensity that momentarily silenced the world around him. "Please, help my mom," she whispered, her voice trembling yet determined. Ethan froze, his mind racing to reconcile the incongruity of the moment. Around them, forks hovered mid-air, and conversations dimmed to murmurs. He glanced at the girl, then at the papers before him, as if confirming that this intrusion wasn't some figment of his imagination. "Why me?" he asked, his voice low but edged with incredulity. Her small fists clenched at her sides as she straightened her back, drawing strength from an invisible reservoir. "Because no one else will." The weight of her words lingered, cutting through the refined hum of the restaurant like a discordant note in a symphony. Ethan studied her, his instinct to dismiss the situation clashing with an unfamiliar pang of concern. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice softening despite himself. "My name is Alana Hayes," she replied, her words crisp and unhesitating. "And my mom. She's sick. She can't move. The ambulance said they wouldn't come without money." The words hit him like a gut punch, the sheer bluntness of her statement stripping away any pretense. Ethan leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "How do you know I can help?" Alana hesitated for a beat, then squared her shoulders. "I don't. But you're here, and you're not like the others. You're not pretending to be too busy." Ethan felt the sharp gazes of the other diners boring into him, their whispers rising like an undercurrent. He hated being the center of attention, especially when he didn't understand what was happening. Yet he couldn't dismiss the urgency in Alana's voice or the quiet desperation in her eyes. He sighed, setting his pen down. "Fine. Show me where she is." Alana didn't smile, nor did she thank him. She simply turned and began walking toward the exit, her steps quick and purposeful. Ethan hesitated only long enough to grab his coat and wallet before following her. The murmurs faded as the door swung shut behind them, the crisp night air greeting him with a chill. Outside, the city pulsed with its usual rhythm, taxis honking, neon lights flickering, and a faint hum of distant music. Alana didn't look back, her small figure weaving through the crowded sidewalk with surprising determination. "How old are you?" Ethan asked, breaking the silence as they turned a corner into a darker, quieter street. "9," she replied without missing a step. "Do you always approach strangers like this?" he pressed, trying to gauge the gravity of the situation. She stopped abruptly, turning to face him. "Only when my mom is dying." Her words landed like a blow, and for the first time in years, Ethan was at a loss for words. Alana didn't wait for a response. She resumed walking, her pace quickening as though afraid he might change his mind. The cityscape transformed around them, skyscrapers giving way to shadowy alleyways and graffiti-covered walls. The smell of damp asphalt and garbage grew stronger as they approached a dilapidated apartment building. Its walls were scarred by time and neglect, and the faint glow of a flickering hallway light barely illuminated the cracked grate. "This is it," Alana said, pushing open the rusted door with both hands. The hallway swallowed what little light there was, its air thick with a mix of mold and despair. Ethan followed her up the narrow staircase, each step creaking ominously beneath his weight. At the top, Alana paused in front of a door, with peeling paint and a broken handle. Her small hand rested on the frame, her shoulders tense. "She's in here," she said softly. The door creaked open, and Ethan was hit by the smell before he saw anything. A sickly mix of sweat, mold, and something faintly metallic. His eyes adjusted to the dim light, revealing a tiny room with bare walls and a single mattress in the center. On it lay a woman, her face pale and gaunt, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. "She's been like this since yesterday," Alana said, her voice breaking for the first time. "I tried. I don't know what else to do." Ethan stood frozen, the weight of the scene pressing down on him. His instincts scrambled to catch up as he pulled out his phone, dialing emergency services with a steadiness that belied the turmoil inside him. "They'll be here soon," he said, crouching beside the woman to check her pulse. It was faint, too faint. He glanced at Alana, who knelt beside her mother, gripping her hand tightly. "You did everything you could," Ethan said, unsure if the words would bring comfort or merely deepen the ache. "They'll help now." But in Alana's eyes, he saw something that told him she already knew what he couldn't yet bring himself to say. The cold night air bit at Ethan's face as he followed Alana through the maze of New York City's less traveled streets. The towering skyscrapers and bustling avenues quickly gave way to cracked sidewalks and dimly lit alleys, the air heavy with the scent of damp concrete and garbage. Ethan pulled his coat tighter around him, his polished shoes clicking against the uneven pavement, a sound that felt oddly out of place here. Alana walked ahead with determined strides, her small frame moving with the urgency of someone twice her age. She glanced back occasionally, as if to make sure Ethan hadn't abandoned her, but said nothing. Her silence was unnerving, her presence like a ghost, leading him into a world he had spent his life avoiding. "What's your mom's name?" Ethan asked, breaking the oppressive quiet. "Camilla," Alana replied without looking back. Her voice was flat, devoid of the urgency that had propelled her to approach him in the restaurant. "She's all I have." The words hung in the air, carrying a weight that made Ethan's chest tighten. He opened his mouth to respond but hesitated. What could he possibly say to comfort her? They turned a corner, and the streetlights grew sparser, their weak glow casting long, jagged shadows across the graffiti-streaked walls. A group of teenagers loitered near a corner store, their laughter sharp and discordant in the otherwise still night. Ethan instinctively quickened his pace, keeping close to Alana as they passed by. "Are we almost there?" he asked, his voice betraying a hint of impatience. Alana nodded. "Just a few more blocks." The silence returned, broken only by the occasional distant honk of a car or the hum of a passing subway beneath their feet. Ethan's thoughts raced as he tried to piece together what he was walking into. Who was this woman Camilla? Why had no one else stepped in to help? And most pressing of all, what could he possibly do for her? When they finally stopped in front of a crumbling apartment building, Ethan's heart sank. The structure loomed over them like a forgotten relic, its walls streaked with grime, and its windows darkened by layers of neglect. The faint flicker of a single bulb above the entrance did little to dispel the gloom. "This is it," Alana said, her voice barely above a whisper. She pushed open the rusted door, and it groaned in protest, the sound echoing down the dimly lit hallway. Inside, the air was stifling, a mix of mildew and stale sweat that clung to Ethan's senses. The narrow corridor was lined with peeling wallpaper, and the floor creaked ominously under their weight. Alana led him up a flight of narrow stairs, each step groaning louder than the last, until they reached a door at the far end of the hall. The door's paint was chipped, and the handle hung loosely, as if it might fall off with a single twist. Alana hesitated, her hand resting on the knob. She turned to Ethan, her wide eyes glistening in the dim light. "She's inside," she said quietly. "Please, just help her." Ethan nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat as he pushed the door open. The room inside was even smaller than he had imagined. A single mattress lay on the floor, its once white sheets now stained and threadbare. The air was heavy with the sickly sweet scent of sweat and sickness. On the mattress lay a woman, Camilla. Her face was pale and gaunt, her chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. A damp cloth rested on her forehead, and her hands lay limp at her sides. She looked as though the weight of the world had pressed her into the mattress, her body too frail to fight back. Alana rushed to her mother's side, kneeling beside the mattress and taking her hand. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I brought someone to help." Ethan stood frozen in the doorway, the gravity of the scene pressing down on him. He had seen desperation before, in boardrooms, on the faces of competitors who had lost everything. But never like this. This was raw, unfiltered survival, and it unsettled him in a way he couldn't articulate. Snapping out of his daze, Ethan pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed emergency services. His fingers moved with practiced efficiency, the product of years of managing high-stakes crises. But this was different. This wasn't about numbers or contracts. This was life and death. "They'll be here soon," he said, kneeling beside Camilla to check her pulse. It was weak, barely there, and his heart sank. He glanced at Alana, who was gripping her mother's hand tightly, her knuckles white. "Did you try calling an ambulance before?" he asked gently. "They came yesterday," Alana replied, her voice breaking. "But they left. They said they couldn't do anything without payment. And we don't have any money." The words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He had always known the world was unfair, but hearing it laid out so starkly, from the mouth of a child no less, made his blood boil. He clenched his jaw, shoving the anger down. This wasn't the time. "They're coming now," he assured her, "and they'll help her this time. I'll make sure of it." Minutes felt like hours as they waited, the oppressive silence broken only by Camilla's labored breaths and the distant wail of a siren. Alana stayed by her mother's side, whispering soft reassurances that Ethan couldn't hear. He watched her, marveling at her strength. For someone so young, she carried herself with a resilience that belied her age. Finally, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway, followed by a sharp knock at the door. Ethan sprang to his feet, pulling the door open to reveal two paramedics. They moved quickly, their faces grim as they assessed the situation. "Pulse is weak," one of them muttered, checking Camilla's vitals. "We need to move her now." Alana hovered nearby, her wide eyes fixed on the paramedics as they worked. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her as best he could. "They'll take care of her," he said softly. "You've done everything you could." As the paramedics lifted Camilla onto a stretcher, Alana turned to Ethan, her voice small but firm. "Can I go with her?" Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "Of course. We'll both go." The ambulance ride was tense and silent, the weight of the situation pressing down on them. Ethan sat across from Alana, watching as she clung to her mother's hand, her fingers trembling. He wanted to say something, to offer comfort, but no words seemed adequate. When they arrived at the hospital, the paramedics rushed Camilla inside, leaving Ethan and Alana in the sterile waiting room. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting stark shadows on the tiled floor. Alana sat beside him, her small frame hunched over, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Ethan glanced at her, his heart aching at the sight. She looked so small, so fragile, yet the strength in her eyes remained. "She'll be okay," he said, though he wasn't sure if he was trying to convince her or himself. Alana didn't respond. She simply stared at the floor, her expression unreadable. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Wallace, the man who had built an empire on confidence and control, felt utterly helpless. The hospital waiting room was a universe of its own, a liminal space where time seemed to stretch endlessly, suspended between hope and despair. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, illuminating rows of uncomfortable plastic chairs and a vending machine that hummed softly in the corner. Ethan Wallace sat stiffly in one of the chairs, his usually confident demeanor eroded by the weight of the situation. Alana Hayes sat beside him, her small frame dwarfed by the oversized chair. Her hands rested on her lap, fingers interlocked so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. She hadn't said a word since they arrived, her gaze fixed firmly on the tiled floor. Ethan glanced at her, unsure of what to say. Words had always been his strength, persuading investors, closing deals, navigating boardroom disputes. But this was different. What could he possibly say to comfort a 9-year-old girl whose mother's life hung by a thread? "Do you want anything to eat?" he asked softly, gesturing toward the vending machine. "A snack? Maybe some water?" Alana shook her head without looking up. Her silence was deafening, her stillness unnerving. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, feeling more out of place than ever. The minutes dragged on, each one punctuated by the occasional click of the receptionist's keyboard or the distant murmur of doctors conversing. Ethan's mind wandered, memories of his own childhood, surfacing unbidden. He thought of his sister, Emily, bright, lively Emily, whose laughter used to fill their home. The memory brought a pang of guilt, a reminder of the promise he had failed to keep. "Mr. Wallace?" A voice broke through his thoughts, pulling him back to the present. He looked up to see a doctor approaching, a clipboard in hand, and a somber expression on his face. Ethan stood, his heart pounding in his chest. "How is she?" The doctor hesitated, glancing briefly at Alana before speaking. "I'm sorry. We did everything we could, but her condition was too advanced. She passed away during surgery." The words hit Ethan like a freight train, stealing the breath from his lungs. He turned to Alana, expecting tears or an outburst, but she remained eerily still, her hands unclasped, falling to her sides as she stared blankly ahead. I'm sorry," Ethan stammered, unsure of what else to say. Alana stood abruptly, her small fists clenching at her sides. "Can I see her?" she asked, her voice steady but devoid of emotion. The doctor nodded. "Of course. Follow me." Ethan trailed behind, as Alana followed the doctor down the sterile hallway. The walls were lined with motivational posters. "Hope is the best medicine," one read, accompanied by an image of a sunrise. But they felt like cruel mockery in this moment. Alana's steps were measured, almost robotic, as if she were bracing herself for what lay ahead. When they entered the room, the air felt heavier, the stillness oppressive. Camilla lay on the hospital bed, her face pale but peaceful, her hands resting gently on her stomach. She looked as though she were merely sleeping, but the absence of her labored breathing was a stark reminder of the truth. Alana approached the bed slowly, each step deliberate. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and gently touched her mother's hand. It was cold to the touch, and the realization seemed to sap the last remnants of strength from her small frame. "I tried," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I tried everything." Ethan stood by the door, giving her space but ready to step in if needed. He watched as Alana's shoulders shook slightly, her pain manifesting in silence rather than sobs. It was a kind of grief he recognized, a grief that had no room for words, only the hollow ache of loss. After a few moments, Alana turned to face him. Her eyes were red but dry, her expression unreadable. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Ethan hesitated, the weight of her question pressing down on him. We figure it out," he said finally. "One step at a time." The drive back to the city was silent, the hum of the car engine the only sound. Alana stared out the window, her face illuminated by the glow of passing streetlights. Ethan stole occasional glances at her, his mind racing with questions. What would happen to her now? Who would take care of her? When they reached her apartment building, Ethan parked the car, but didn't immediately get out. "Alana," he began, his voice tentative. "Do you have any other family? Anyone who can take care of you?" She shook her head. "It was just me and my mom." The simplicity of her answer made his chest tighten. He looked up at the building, its facade even more foreboding in the dim light. How could he leave her here, alone, after everything she had been through? "You can't stay here," he said firmly, more to himself than to her. "Not like this." Alana turned to him, her wide eyes searching his face. "What do you mean?" "I mean you'll stay with me," Ethan said, surprising even himself with the certainty in his voice. "At least until we figure out something more permanent." She studied him for a long moment, as if trying to gauge whether he meant it. Finally she nodded, her expression softening ever so slightly. "Okay." Back at his apartment, Ethan found himself at a loss once again. He showed Alana to a guest room. Its pristine decor, a stark contrast to the world she had just left behind. She placed her small backpack, her only possession, on the bed, and sat down, her feet barely touching the floor. "Thank you," she said quietly, breaking the silence. Ethan nodded. It's nothing. Just try to get some rest, okay? We'll figure things out in the morning." As he closed the door behind him, Ethan leaned against the wall, exhaling deeply. For the first time in years, he felt like he was standing on uncertain ground, and the weight of responsibility was heavier than he had ever imagined. In his room, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The image of Alana's small, trembling figure haunted him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something far more complicated and far more important than anything he had ever faced. The morning sunlight filtered through the towering windows of Ethan's penthouse, casting long streaks of gold across the polished floors. Ethan Wallace sat at the dining table, his laptop open in front of him, but his mind far from the lines of emails and contracts that filled the screen. Instead, his gaze drifted toward the closed door of the guest room where Alana slept. He had barely slept himself, his mind preoccupied with questions that seemed to have no easy answers. What would happen to Alana now? Was he truly equipped to take on the responsibility of caring for a child, let alone one who had just lost her mother? The very thought made his chest tighten, with a mixture of fear and determination. The soft sound of footsteps broke his train of thought. He looked up to see Alana standing in the hallway, her small frame silhouetted against the morning light. She was wearing the same clothes as the day before, her eyes puffy from lack of sleep. "Good morning," Ethan said, his voice gentler than usual. "Morning," Alana replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated, then added, "I didn't know where to go." "You're fine," Ethan assured her. "Come sit down. Are you hungry?" Alana nodded slowly, taking a seat at the edge of the large dining table. She looked around the expansive room, her eyes lingering on the minimalist decor and the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city. It was a far cry from the cramped apartment she had called home. Ethan moved to the kitchen, rummaging through the fridge with an awkwardness that betrayed his lack of experience. He managed to find some eggs and bread, quickly throwing together a simple breakfast. When he placed the plate in front of Alana, she stared at it for a moment before picking up her fork. "Thank you," she murmured, her tone polite but distant. Ethan sat across from her, watching as she ate in silence. He felt an almost unbearable urge to say something, to bridge the gap between them. But every word that came to mind felt insufficient. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Alana, I need to ask you something important. Do you have any other family? Anyone who might be able to take care of you?" Alana paused, her fork hovering midair. "No," she said softly. "It was just me and my mom. Always." The simplicity of her answer hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "Okay," he said finally. "Then we'll figure this out together." By mid-morning, the doorbell rang, its sharp chime cutting through the quiet apartment. Ethan opened the door to find a woman in her early 50s standing there, her expression a mixture of professionalism and sympathy. She wore a tailored blazer, and a badge clipped to her chest identified her as Margaret Avery, a social worker with the Department of Child Welfare. "Mr. Wallace?" she asked, extending a hand. "Yes," Ethan replied, shaking her hand. "Please, come in." Margaret stepped inside, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of the penthouse with the precision of someone accustomed to assessing environments. Ethan led her to the living room, where Alana sat curled up on the couch, her hands clutching a mug of hot cocoa. "Alana," Margaret said gently, her tone softening. "How are you doing, sweetheart?" Alana looked up, her wide eyes flicking between Margaret and Ethan. She shrugged. "I'm fine." Margaret nodded, taking a seat across from her. "I know this is a lot to take in, but I'm here to help. My job is to make sure you're safe and that we figure out the best plan for you moving forward." "What does that mean?" Alana asked, her voice wary. Margaret glanced at Ethan before answering. "It means we need to determine where you'll live. Right now, you're staying with Mr. Wallace, but that's not a permanent solution. We have to explore all the options, including foster care." Ethan's jaw tightened at the mention of foster care. "She's fine here," he said firmly. "I can take care of her." Margaret turned her attention to him, her expression calm but resolute. "Mr. Wallace, I understand your intentions, but caring for a child isn't something that can be decided informally. There are legal processes in place, and we have to ensure that Alana is in an environment that meets her needs." "She has everything she needs here," Ethan argued, his voice rising slightly. "She's safe, she's comfortable, and I'm more than capable of providing for her." Margaret's gaze softened, but her tone remained firm. "Providing financially isn't the same as parenting, Mr. Wallace. Have you ever taken care of a child before?" Ethan hesitated, the question catching him off guard. "No," he admitted, "but I'm willing to learn. I'm not going to let her be uprooted again." Margaret studied him for a long moment, as if weighing his sincerity. Finally, she nodded. If you're serious about keeping Alana in your care, you'll need to petition for temporary custody. It's not an easy process, and you'll have to prove that you can provide for her emotional, educational, and developmental needs. I'll do whatever it takes, Ethan said without hesitation. Margaret's expression softened slightly. Very well. I'll provide you with the necessary information to get started. In the meantime, Alana will remain under the department's supervision. After Margaret left, the apartment felt unusually quiet. Ethan sat at the dining table, staring at the stack of documents she had left behind. The enormity of the task ahead loomed over him, but he pushed the doubts aside. He had made a promise to Alana, and he intended to keep it. Alana appeared in the doorway, her small figure barely visible against the grandness of the room. "Is she going to take me away?" she asked, her voice trembling. Ethan looked up, his expression softening. "No," he said firmly, "I won't let that happen." "Do you promise?" she whispered, her eyes wide with unspoken fear. "I promise," Ethan replied, his voice steady. "No one is going to take you away." For the first time, Alana's guarded expression softened. She nodded slowly, a flicker of trust beginning to take root. That night, as Alana slept in the guest room, Ethan sat in his study, poring over the custody paperwork. The once imposing man, who had built an empire on calculated decisions and unshakable confidence, now found himself grappling with a challenge far greater than any he had faced before. But as he looked at a small drawing Alana had left on the coffee table, a simple sketch of her and her mother smiling, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about fulfilling a promise. It was about giving Alana the stability and love she deserved. And for the first time in years, Ethan Wallace felt like he had found something worth fighting for. The first morning of their new arrangement dawned quietly. The sun filtered through the tall windows of Ethan's penthouse, casting a warm glow across the room. The silence, however, was far from peaceful. It was thick with the unspoken reality of two strangers trying to adjust to a life neither had planned for. Ethan Wallace was used to precision and order. His days were carefully structured, a seamless routine designed for maximum efficiency. But as he stood in the kitchen, staring at an array of ingredients he didn't quite know what to do with, it became clear that his world was no longer operating on his terms. Alana shuffled into the kitchen, her small frame swallowed by one of Ethan's oversized sweaters. She looked at the counter, where Ethan had laid out bread, eggs, and various condiments, and raised an eyebrow. "Are you cooking?" she asked, skepticism dripping from her voice. "Attempting to," Ethan replied, his tone defensive. "How hard can it be to make breakfast?" Alana climbed onto one of the high stools, watching him with an expression that was both amused and wary. "Do you know how to scramble eggs?" Ethan hesitated, his hand hovering over the frying pan. "I've seen it done." Alana smirked. This should be interesting. It wasn't long before the kitchen was filled with the smell of slightly burned toast and eggs that were more rubbery than fluffy. Alana poked at her plate with a fork, her lips twitching as she tried to suppress a laugh. "Well?" Ethan asked, sitting across from her. "What do you think?" "It's edible," Alana said diplomatically, though her grin gave her away. Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. "You're a tough critic." As the days passed, it became clear that Ethan's carefully curated life was ill-equipped to accommodate a 9-year-old. The sprawling penthouse, with its sleek furniture and minimalist decor, felt more like a museum than a home. The cold, polished surfaces seemed to magnify the distance between them. Alana spent most of her time in the guest room, a space Ethan had hastily prepared with new bedding and a few books he thought a child might like. She rarely ventured out, her presence so quiet that Ethan often forgot she was there. One evening, as he worked late in his study, a faint sound drew his attention. He followed the melody to the living room, where he found Alana sitting at the grand piano. Her fingers moved tentatively across the keys, piecing together a soft, haunting tune. Ethan leaned against the doorway, captivated by the emotion in her playing. When the melody ended, Alana looked up, startled to see him there. "Sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't think you'd hear." "Don't apologize," Ethan said, stepping into the room. "That was beautiful. Did you make it up?" Alana nodded, her fingers lightly brushing the keys. "My mom used to sing. I tried to turn one of her songs into a piano piece." Ethan hesitated, unsure how to respond. "She must have been very proud of you." Alana's expression softened, a small, bittersweet smile playing on her lips. "Maybe." For the first time, Ethan saw a glimpse of the person beneath her guarded exterior. A child who had lost so much, but still carried a spark of creativity and resilience. Ethan quickly learned that his responsibilities extended far beyond the walls of the penthouse. He enrolled Alana in a nearby school, a private institution known for its rigorous academics and well-rounded curriculum. Though he hoped it would give her a sense of normalcy, the transition was anything but smooth. On her first day, Ethan walked her to the front gates, feeling oddly out of place among the other parents. They whispered behind their hands, their curious gazes flicking between him and Alana. It was clear that Ethan Wallace, the reclusive tech mogul, didn't fit the mold of a typical guardian. Alana clutched her backpack tightly, her wide eyes scanning the sea of unfamiliar faces. "Do I really have to go?" she asked, her voice small. "You'll be fine," Ethan said, crouching to her level. "Just give it a chance, okay?" She nodded reluctantly, but the look in her eyes betrayed her uncertainty. That evening, when Ethan asked how her day went, Alana shrugged. "It was okay," she said, her tone evasive. But the truth came out a few days later, when Ethan found her sitting alone in her room, staring at a torn piece of paper. It was a note someone had slipped into her locker, scrawled with the words, "You don't belong here." Ethan's chest tightened as he knelt beside her. "Alana, did someone give this to you?" She hesitated, then nodded. "It doesn't matter. I'm used to it." "It does matter," Ethan said firmly. "No one has the right to make you feel like you don't belong." Alana looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of defiance and vulnerability. "Why do you care so much? You don't even know me." The question caught Ethan off guard. He searched for the right words, finally settling on the truth. "Because I've been where you are, feeling like you're on your own, and I promised I wouldn't let you go through that alone." For the first time, Alana's defenses cracked. She didn't say anything, but she leaned slightly closer to him, her silence speaking volumes. As if navigating parenthood weren't challenging enough, Ethan found himself under scrutiny from the media. Word of his sudden guardianship had leaked, and tabloids were quick to spin the story into scandal. Headlines like "Tech Titan's Secret Ward" and "Can Ethan Wallace Handle Fatherhood" dominated the news cycle. The pressure mounted further when Ethan received a letter from the family court, notifying him of an upcoming custody review. The date was set for 6 weeks away, and the letter made it clear that his suitability as Alana's guardian would be heavily scrutinized. Ethan shared the news with Alana over dinner, carefully explaining what the review entailed. "It's just a formality," he said, though the tension in his voice betrayed his anxiety. "We'll show them that you're doing well here, and everything will be fine." Alana nodded, but her expression was pensive. "What if they don't think you're good enough?" Ethan reached across the table, placing a hand over hers. Then we'll fight. Together. Despite the challenges, a routine began to take shape. Ethan adjusted his work schedule, carving out time to help Alana with her homework and attend her school events. He even started learning to cook, though his culinary skills remained a work in progress. Meanwhile, Alana continued to find solace in music. Ethan surprised her with a digital keyboard for her room, and she spent hours composing songs, her confidence growing with each passing day. One evening, as she played a particularly moving piece, Ethan sat in the doorway listening quietly. When she finished, he clapped softly, earning a shy smile from her. "You're incredible, you know that?" he said. Alana shrugged, but the faint blush on her cheeks gave her away. "Thanks." As the custody review loomed closer, Ethan found himself grappling with doubts. He had built his life on control and precision, but this was a challenge unlike any he had faced before. Yet every time he looked at Alana, saw her determination, her resilience, her quiet strength, he knew he couldn't fail her. One night, as they sat together on the couch, Alana turned to him and asked, "Do you think I'll ever feel like I really belong?" Ethan's heart ached at the question, but he didn't hesitate in his answer. "You already belong, Alana. And no matter what happens, I'll make sure you always have a place to call home." For the first time, Alana smiled, a real unguarded smile that lit up the room. And in that moment, Ethan knew they were no longer two strangers adjusting to a new life. They were something more. Ethan Wallace stood at the edge of a quiet cemetery, the chilled air brushing against his face. The sprawling city that defined his life seemed a world away, replaced by the solemn stillness of this sacred ground. Before him lay a modest headstone, its granite surface weathered by years of exposure. Emily Wallace, 1984 to 2001. The name stared back at him, each letter a haunting reminder of a promise left unfulfilled. His younger sister, Emily, had been the light of his family, a brilliant, compassionate soul, extinguished far too soon. Ethan crouched down, brushing away a few stray leaves that had settled at the base of the stone. "Hey, Emily," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "It's been a while." The last time Ethan had been here, he was a grief-stricken teenager, overwhelmed by guilt and regret. Emily had battled leukemia for 3 long years, and Ethan, focused on school and his budding ambitions, had often been absent. He hadn't been there when she needed him most. "I thought about you today," Ethan said, his words faltering. "About how much you would have loved Alana." The name felt foreign on his tongue, but it carried weight. Alana Hayes, the 9-year-old girl who had barged into his life with a plea for help, had ignited something in him he hadn't felt since Emily, a sense of responsibility, of purpose. "She reminds me of you," he continued. "That same fire, that same stubbornness. But I don't know if I'm enough for her. What if I let her down, too?" The wind rustled the trees, the sound almost like a whispered answer. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I couldn't save you," he said softly, his voice cracking. "But I have to save her. I have to." Meanwhile, back at the penthouse, Alana wandered through the halls, her footsteps echoing softly against the polished floors. She had grown more comfortable in the space, but the emptiness still felt daunting. Passing Ethan's study, she noticed a framed photograph on his desk. A younger Ethan, smiling beside a girl who looked eerily similar to him. Curious, Alana picked up the frame and studied it closely. "Emily," she whispered, reading the inscription at the bottom. She set the photo down carefully, her mind racing with questions. Ethan rarely spoke about himself, and this glimpse into his past intrigued her. When Ethan returned later that afternoon, he found Alana sitting on the couch, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the edge of a sketchbook. She looked up as he entered, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Who's Emily?" she asked, her tone curious but not accusatory. Ethan froze, caught off guard by the question. "She was my sister," he said after a moment, his voice quieter than usual. "She passed away a long time ago." Alana nodded, processing the information. "You don't talk about her much." "It's not easy," Ethan admitted. He hesitated, then added, "She would have liked you, though. You remind me of her in a lot of ways." Alana smiled faintly, but her expression turned serious. "Do you miss her?" "Every day," Ethan replied honestly. "But I try to focus on what she taught me, on the kind of person she was. She always believed in helping others, no matter what." Alana tilted her head, considering his words. "Is that why you helped me? Because of her?" Ethan paused, meeting her gaze. "Partly," he said, "but mostly because you needed someone, and I couldn't walk away." Over the next few weeks, Alana began to open up more, sharing stories about her late mother, Camilla. She spoke about the lullabies her mother used to sing, the makeshift birthday cakes they'd bake together, and the way Camilla always made her feel safe, even when things were falling apart. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Alana pulled out her sketchbook and showed Ethan a drawing she had been working on. It was a simple but striking piece, a mother and daughter holding hands beneath a starry sky. "This is beautiful," Ethan said, genuinely impressed. "Is this you and your mom?" "Oh," Alana nodded. "I used to draw a lot when I was younger. My mom always said I should keep at it, but I stopped for a while." "Well, I think you should start again," Ethan said. "You've got talent, Alana. Real talent." Alana's cheeks flushed, and she ducked her head, but Ethan could see the flicker of pride in her expression. One afternoon, as Ethan reviewed documents for the upcoming custody review, the doorbell rang. He opened the door to find a man standing there, a tall, wiry figure with sharp features and an unsettling smile. "Mr. Wallace," the man said, extending a hand. "My name's Darren Hayes. I'm Alana's uncle." Ethan's guard went up immediately. "I wasn't aware Alana had any living relatives." Darren's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I've been out of the picture for a while, but now that her mother's gone, I thought it was time to step up." Ethan crossed his arms, his expression hardening. "What exactly are you stepping up to do?" "To take her in, of course," Darren said smoothly. "She's family, after all." Ethan didn't buy it for a second. There was something off about Darren, something opportunistic. "I think we should discuss this with the social worker," Ethan said, his tone firm. "Of course," Darren replied, his tone dripping with false politeness. "I just wanted to introduce myself. Alana deserves to be with family, don't you think?" Ethan didn't respond, watching as Darren turned and walked away, his presence leaving a sour taste in the air. That evening, Ethan relayed the encounter to Margaret Avery, who promised to investigate Darren's background. But the interaction left Ethan uneasy. Alana's future, which had already seemed uncertain, now felt even more precarious. As Ethan stood by the window, staring out at the city lights, Alana approached him quietly. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice soft. Ethan turned to her, his expression troubled but determined. "Nothing we can't handle," he said. "I promised I'd fight for you, Alana, and I will." For the first time, Alana reached out and took his hand, her small fingers curling around his. "I trust you," she said simply. Ethan squeezed her hand gently, his resolve hardening. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he wouldn't let her down. Not now, not ever. The courtroom was an intimidating space, its polished wood paneling and high ceilings exuding an air of authority. Ethan Wallace sat at the petitioner's table, his usually unshakable composure replaced by a tension that gripped him from the moment he stepped inside. Beside him sat his lawyer, a seasoned advocate named Jonathan Reed, whose calm demeanor was a stark contrast to Ethan's unease. Across the aisle, Darren Hayes sat with his own legal counsel, his smug expression a reminder of the challenge Ethan faced. Darren had wasted no time filing for custody of Alana, claiming that as her uncle, he was her rightful guardian. Ethan knew better. This was about money and leverage, not love or responsibility. Alana sat quietly at the back of the courtroom, flanked by Margaret Avery, the social worker who had been instrumental in guiding Ethan through the custody process. Though she appeared calm, Ethan could see the nervous energy in her tightly clasped hands. "Mr. Wallace," Jonathan said, breaking the silence, "remember to stay composed. The judge needs to see that you're not just capable of providing for Alana, but that you're committed to her well-being." Ethan nodded, taking a deep breath. "I won't let her down." The proceedings began with the judge, a stern but fair woman named Judge Evelyn Harper, outlining the purpose of the hearing. "This court is tasked with determining the best interests of Alana Hayes, a minor who has lost her primary caregiver. Both parties have petitioned for custody, and we will hear arguments from each side." Darren's lawyer was the first to present their case. She painted Darren as a devoted uncle who had been kept away due to circumstances beyond his control. "Mr. Hayes has always cared deeply for his niece," she claimed. "He is her blood relative, and it is only right that she be placed with family." Ethan clenched his fists under the table, resisting the urge to speak out. He could feel Darren's eyes on him, daring him to react. When it was Jonathan's turn, he rose with quiet confidence. "Your Honor, while Mr. Hayes may share a familial connection with Alana, it is Mr. Wallace who has demonstrated a genuine commitment to her well-being. Over the past several weeks, he has provided her with stability, emotional support, and opportunities for growth. This case is not about biology. It is about what is best for Alana." The questioning began with Darren, whose charm quickly faded under scrutiny. Jonathan asked pointed questions about his financial instability, his criminal record, and his lack of contact with Alana prior to Camilla's passing. "Mr. Hayes," Jonathan said, his tone sharp but controlled, "can you explain why you waited until now to involve yourself in Alana's life?" Darren shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't know how bad things were. If I had known, but you didn't know," Jonathan interjected. "And yet, here you are, claiming to have her best interests at heart. Why should this court believe that your intentions are genuine?" Darren faltered, his earlier bravado giving way to frustration. "She's my niece. That should be enough." Jonathan's gaze was unrelenting. "Respectfully, Your Honor, blood ties alone do not equate to a stable or supportive home environment." When it was Ethan's turn to testify, he spoke with a sincerity that surprised even himself. He described the journey he and Alana had been on, the challenges, the moments of connection, and the bond they had built. "Alana has been through more in her 9 years than most people faced in a lifetime," Ethan said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "She deserves a home where she feels safe, loved, and valued. I'm committed to providing that for her, no matter what." The courtroom grew silent as Alana was called to the stand. Margaret gave her a reassuring nod as she walked to the front, her small figure dwarfed by the imposing furniture. She climbed into the witness chair, her feet dangling slightly above the floor. "Alana," Judge Harper began, her tone gentle, "I know this must be difficult for you, but I'd like to hear from you directly. Can you tell me how you feel about living with Mr. Wallace? Alana glanced at Ethan, then back at the judge. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was clear. At first, I didn't know if I could trust him, she admitted. He's not like my mom, but he listens to me. He cares, and he makes me feel safe. The judge nodded, her expression thoughtful. And how do you feel about Mr. Hayes? Alana hesitated, her brow furrowing. I don't know him. He never came to see me or my mom. I don't think he really wants me. I think he just wants... She trailed off, glancing nervously at Darren. You can speak freely here, Alana, Judge Harper said gently. I think he just wants money, Alana said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. The room was silent for a moment, the weight of her words hanging in the air. As the hearing drew to a close, Jonathan delivered a powerful closing argument. This is not a case about convenience or entitlement. It is a case about a child's future, a future that Mr. Wallace has shown he is willing and able to nurture. Alana deserves more than a roof over her head. She deserves a home filled with love, support, and opportunity. Mr. Wallace has provided that, and I urge the court to allow him to continue doing so. Darren's lawyer attempted to counter, but the strength of Ethan's case, bolstered by Alana's testimony, was undeniable. After what felt like an eternity, Judge Harper returned with her decision. This court recognizes the extraordinary circumstances of this case. While Mr. Hayes has a biological connection to Alana, it is clear that Mr. Wallace has demonstrated a deep commitment to her well-being. Therefore, I am granting Mr. Wallace temporary custody with a review in 6 months to ensure that Alana's needs continue to be met. Relief washed over Ethan, though he maintained his composure. Alana let out a shaky breath, her shoulders relaxing for the first time all day. As they left the courtroom, Alana turned to Ethan, her eyes wide with emotion. You meant it, she said quietly. When you said you wouldn't let anyone take me? I meant every word, Ethan replied, his voice steady. No one is going to take you away, Alana. Not now, not ever. For the first time, Alana reached out and took his hand, her small fingers curling around his. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. Together, they walked out into the crisp afternoon air, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Ethan Wallace sat in the middle of his sprawling living room, surrounded by chaos. Stacks of cardboard boxes were scattered around him, their labels hastily scrawled. Books, clothes, miscellaneous. Alana knelt on the floor nearby, carefully unpacking a box filled with art supplies. Her concentration was intense, her small hands arranging pencils and sketch pads into neat piles. This doesn't look like the work of a professional mover, Alana quipped, her tone teasing. Ethan chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. I thought we'd save some money and do it ourselves. Turns out I might have overestimated my organizational skills. Alana looked up, a rare smile tugging at her lips. At least you're trying. That smile was a small victory, one Ethan had learned to treasure. Over the past few weeks, their relationship had grown from awkward cohabitation into something that felt closer to a partnership. The once cold penthouse was slowly transforming into a home, piece by piece. Ethan had always prided himself on the sleek, minimalist design of his penthouse. But as he watched Alana tape a colorful drawing to the refrigerator, one of her and her mother standing under a starry sky, he realized how sterile the space had been. It lacked life, personality, and warmth. Together, they began making changes. Ethan let Alana choose new furniture for the living room, replacing the sharp, modern lines with soft, inviting pieces. They picked out curtains in warm tones, added throw pillows with vibrant patterns, and filled the walls with artwork, most of it Alana's. The transformation extended to Alana's room. Ethan had gone all out, turning the once bare guest room into a sanctuary tailored to her interests. A digital keyboard sat in one corner, surrounded by shelves stocked with sheet music and books. The bed was adorned with a cozy quilt in her favorite shades of blue, and a corkboard hung above the desk, already filled with sketches and photos. When Alana saw the finished room, her eyes widened in disbelief. "You did it all this for me?" "Of course," Ethan said, smiling. "This is your home now, too." Alana didn't say anything, but the way she carefully traced her fingers over the keys of the keyboard spoke volumes. As their home began to take shape, Ethan turned his attention to the next challenge, Alana's education. He had enrolled her in Crestwood Academy, a prestigious school known for its strong arts program. On paper, it was the perfect fit. But in practice, Alana struggled to find her footing. At first, it was the academics. Crestwood's rigorous curriculum was a sharp contrast to the underfunded public school she had attended before. Ethan hired a tutor to help her catch up, but it was clear the transition was taking a toll on her confidence. Then came the social challenges. Alana, with her sharp wit and guarded demeanor, was an easy target for the cliques that dominated the school. She often came home with stories of whispered taunts and sideways glances. One evening, as Ethan prepared dinner, a surprisingly edible attempt at pasta, Alana sat at the counter, unusually quiet. "What's on your mind?" Ethan asked, sliding a plate in front of her. "Just school stuff," she muttered, twirling her fork through the spaghetti. "Want to talk about it?" Alana hesitated, then sighed. "There's this girl, Madison. She said I don't belong there, that I only got in because you're rich." Ethan's jaw tightened. "That's not true, and you know it. You got in because you're talented and hardworking." "Maybe," Alana said, her voice barely audible, "but it doesn't feel like it." Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm but reassuring. "Listen to me, Alana. You earned your place at that school. Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't belong." As Alana adjusted to her new school, she found solace in music. Her piano teacher, Ms. Carter, quickly recognized her talent and encouraged her to perform at the upcoming school recital. At first, Alana was hesitant. "What if I mess up?" she asked Ethan one evening as they sat in the living room. "You won't," Ethan said confidently. "But even if you do, it's not the end of the world. What matters is that you try." His words seemed to resonate, and over the following weeks, Alana threw herself into practice. The house was filled with music, the notes of her composition weaving through the air like a tangible expression of her emotions. The night of the recital arrived, and the school auditorium buzzed with excitement. Ethan sat in the audience, his heart pounding, as he watched Alana take the stage. She looked small and vulnerable under the bright lights, but when she began to play, the room fell silent. Her performance was breathtaking. The piece started with a gentle, mournful melody that gradually built into a triumphant crescendo, each note a reflection of her journey. When she finished, the audience erupted into applause. Ethan stood, clapping harder than anyone else. As Alana took her bow, their eyes met across the room. For the first time, he saw a glimmer of pride in her expression. After the recital, Miss Carter approached Ethan and Alana in the crowded lobby. "Alana, that was incredible," she said. "Have you ever considered applying to a music program? With your talent, you could go far." Alana's cheeks flushed. "I don't know," she said shyly. "I'm not that good." "You are," Ethan interjected. "And if this is something you want to pursue, I'll support you every step of the way." That night, As they walked home, under the glow of the city lights, Alana looked up at Ethan. "Do you really think I could do it? Be a musician?" "I don't think it," Ethan said, smiling. "I know it." As they climbed the steps to the penthouse, Ethan's phone buzzed with a new email. He opened it, his stomach sinking, as he read the subject line: "Custody review scheduled." The 6-month review was only weeks away, and Ethan knew the stakes had never been higher. But as he glanced at Alana, who was humming a tune under her breath, he felt a renewed sense of determination. He had promised to fight for her, and he intended to keep that promise. The school auditorium was a symphony of sounds: nervous whispers, the soft rustling of programs, and the occasional burst of laughter from excited parents. Ethan Wallace sat near the middle of the audience, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. He had attended countless high-stakes meetings, negotiated billion-dollar deals, but nothing had ever made him feel as anxious as this moment. On stage, the spotlight illuminated a polished grand piano. The recital was already underway, and the students before Alana played their pieces with varying degrees of skill and confidence. Ethan clapped politely for each performance, but his mind was consumed by thoughts of the girl backstage. Alana Hayes? She was next. Behind the heavy red curtain, Alana sat on a small bench, her hands resting on her lap. She wore a simple navy dress Ethan had bought for the occasion, and her hair was pulled back with a ribbon. Despite the calm she projected, her fingers trembled slightly. Miss Carter, her piano teacher, crouched beside her. "How are you feeling?" she asked gently. "Nervous," Alana admitted. "What if I mess up?" Miss Carter smiled. "Everyone gets nervous before they perform. But you've worked hard, and you're ready. Just focus on the music and let it guide you." Alana nodded, though her stomach churned. As the applause for the previous performer died down, a stagehand appeared, gesturing for her to get ready. Alana took a deep breath, clenching and unclenching her fist to steady herself. "You've got this," Miss Carter whispered, giving her a reassuring pat on the shoulder. As Alana stepped onto the stage, the auditorium fell silent. The spotlight followed her small frame as she crossed to the piano, its light making her appear both fragile and luminous. Ethan held his breath, his heart pounding in time with her slow, deliberate steps. When she reached the piano, Alana paused. She took a moment to adjust the bench and lay her hands lightly on the keys. Then she looked up, scanning the audience until her eyes found Ethan. He gave her a small, encouraging nod, and she nodded back. The first notes rang out, soft and tentative, like a whisper in the dark. The melody was her own creation, a piece she had labored over for weeks. It began with a haunting, melancholy tone, reflecting the struggles and losses she had endured. But as the piece progressed, it transformed, notes cascading like a waterfall, building into a triumphant crescendo that filled the room with hope and resilience. Ethan felt tears sting his eyes as he listened. The music wasn't just a performance. It was a story. Alana's story. A story of pain and perseverance, of finding light in the darkest moments. When the final note hung in the air, there was a beat of silence before the audience erupted into applause. Parents, teachers, and students alike stood to their feet, their cheers echoing through the auditorium. Ethan was among the first to rise, clapping so hard his hands stung. On stage, Alana stood and took a bow. Her face was flushed, her eyes wide with surprise and gratitude. For the first time, she allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. As she left the stage, Miss Carter met her with open arms. "You were amazing, Alana," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Truly amazing." Ethan waited in the lobby, scanning the crowd, until he spotted Alana. When their eyes met, she broke into a run. Her small feet, barely making a sound on the polished floor. She threw her arms around him, and for a moment, all the awkwardness and hesitation that had defined their early days together melted away. "You were incredible," Ethan said, his voice hoarse with pride. "I've never been prouder of anyone in my life." Alana pulled back, her eyes glistening. "Really? Really?" he said. "You showed everyone what I've known all along. You're extraordinary." As the crowd began to thin, the principal of Crestwood Academy approached them, a broad smile on his face. "Mr. Wallace, Alana," he said, extending his hand. "I wanted to personally congratulate you. That performance was nothing short of breathtaking." "Thank you," Alana said shyly, clutching the edge of her dress. "I also wanted to share some exciting news," the principal continued. "We'd like to offer Alana a scholarship to our advanced music program. It's a competitive program, but I believe she has the talent and drive to excel." Alana's eyes widened, and she looked up at Ethan, unsure of what to say. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Ethan said, smiling. "This is your chance to do something amazing." After a moment of hesitation, Alana nodded. "Yes, thank you. I won't let you down." The principal beamed. "We're honored to have you." That night, as they returned to the penthouse, Alana was quieter than usual. Ethan noticed her pensive expression as they sat together in the living room, the lights of the city twinkling outside the window. "What's on your mind?" he asked gently. "It's just—" Alana began, then paused. "What if I'm not good enough for the program? What if they made a mistake?" "Alana," Ethan said, leaning forward, "do you know why they chose you? Because you're talented, hardworking, and unique. You've earned this, and I'll be here to support you every step of the way." She nodded, though the doubt in her eyes lingered. "Okay, okay," Ethan echoed, smiling. "Now, how about we celebrate? Ice cream?" Alana's lips twitched into a small smile. "Only if you don't burn it like you did the toast," Ethan laughed. And for the first time that day, the tension in the room lifted. As they sat together eating ice cream, Ethan's phone buzzed with an email notification. He opened it, his smile fading, as he read the subject line: "Custody Review Update. Additional documentation required." His stomach sank. The 6-month review wasn't just approaching, it was becoming more complicated. He glanced at Alana, who was laughing softly at one of his failed jokes. The stakes had never been higher. Ethan set the phone aside, forcing himself to focus on the moment. No matter what challenges lay ahead, he was determined to fight for Alana. She had given him a sense of purpose he hadn't known he was missing, and he wasn't about to let anyone take her away. The faint hum of the city filtered through the windows of Ethan Wallace's penthouse as he reviewed the email for the third time. Each word seemed heavier than the last. Additional documentation required. Custody review update. Potential concerns raised. His jaw clenched as he scrolled through the list of documents and affidavits the court was now demanding. It was clear someone was actively trying to challenge his custody of Alana. He didn't have to guess who. Darren Hayes. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting to the living room, where Alana sat at the piano. She was practicing a new piece, her fingers moving across the keys with a tentative confidence that had taken weeks to build. Watching her, Ethan felt the familiar pang of protectiveness. He had promised her safety and stability, and he wasn't about to let anyone take that away. The next morning, Ethan received a call from Margaret Avery. "We need to talk," she said, her tone uncharacteristically tense. Within the hour, she was seated across from him in his study, a folder of documents spread out between them. "Darren Hayes has officially filed a motion to intervene in the custody case," Margaret began. He's claiming that as Alana's biological uncle, he has a stronger claim to her care. Ethan's fists clenched. This isn't about Alana. Darren doesn't care about her. I know, Margaret said, but he's exploiting a loophole. The court tends to favor biological relatives, especially if they can prove financial stability. Financial stability, Ethan scoffed. Darren is anything but stable. That's where things get tricky, Margaret admitted. He's provided documents showing a sudden influx of income. It's suspicious, but without concrete evidence, the court has to take it at face value. Ethan's mind raced. Then we'll find that evidence, whatever it takes. Margaret nodded. You have resources, Ethan. Use them. Ethan wasted no time. That evening, he called in a favor from Sophia Chong, an old friend and cybersecurity expert. I need you to dig into someone, he said, as they met at his office. Darren Hayes. I want to know where his money is coming from. Sophia raised an eyebrow. This about the custody case? Ethan nodded. He's trying to take Alana. I can't let that happen. Got it, Sophia said. Give me a day. True to her word, Sophia returned the next evening with a detailed report. It looks like Darren recently received a large payout from a trust, she explained. But here's the kicker. The trust was set up by someone named Victor Lane. Ring any bells? Ethan frowned. Victor Lane. The loan shark Camilla mentioned before she passed? Exactly, Sophia said. It seems Darren and Lane have a history. I'm willing to bet this trust was part of a deal to push Darren into challenging your custody. Ethan's stomach churned. Can we prove it? Not yet, Sophia said. But we're close. If we can link Darren to Lane's more unsavory dealings, the court won't take him seriously. While Ethan worked tirelessly to build his case, Alana began to sense the tension in the air. One evening, as they sat together for dinner, she finally spoke up. Is Darren trying to take me away? Ethan set down his fork, startled by her directness. Where did you hear that? I overheard Margaret talking to you the other day, Alana admitted. Is it true? Ethan hesitated, then nodded. He's trying, but it's not going to happen. I won't let it. Alana's eyes filled with tears. What if the court doesn't believe you? What if they make me go with him? Ethan moved to her side, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Listen to me, Alana. No matter what happens, I will fight for you. You're not going anywhere. For the first time in weeks, Alana leaned into him, seeking the comfort she hadn't allowed herself to ask for. Promise? She whispered. I promise, Ethan said firmly. A week later, Ethan confronted Darren directly. They met in a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown, at Darren's insistence. Ethan arrived first, his jaw tight, as he spotted Darren strolling in, his smirk as infuriating as ever. Well, well, Darren said, sliding into the seat across from Ethan. Look who's fighting so hard to play daddy. This isn't a game, Darren, Ethan said coldly. You're playing with Alana's life. And you think you're any better? Darren shot back. You don't know what it takes to raise a kid. I know more than you ever will, Ethan snapped. You've never even tried to be there for her. Darren leaned back, his smirk widening. That's where you're wrong. I'm her family, Wallace. Blood means something, even if you don't get it. Blood doesn't make you a parent, Ethan said, his voice low and firm. Love, commitment, sacrifice. That's what matters, and you have none of it. Darren's smile faltered, but only for a moment. We'll see what the court thinks, he said, standing. Good luck, Wallace. You're going to need it. With the custody review approaching, Ethan doubled down on his efforts. Margaret provided character affidavits from teachers, neighbors, and even Alana's piano instructor, all attesting to the positive changes they'd seen in her. Meanwhile, Sophia continued digging into Darren's financials. Late one night, she called Ethan with a breakthrough. "I found the smoking gun," she said. Lane transferred money directly to Darren's account, under the guise of child support. "It's enough to prove they're working together." Ethan felt a wave of relief. "Send me everything. This changes everything." As Ethan prepared for the custody review, he found Alana sitting by the window, her sketchbook in her lap. She was drawing a picture of the two of them, a simple, heartfelt depiction of their life together. "Is that us?" Ethan asked, smiling. Alana nodded. "I wanted to make something for the court, to show them what it's like here." Ethan's heart swelled. "It's perfect," he said softly. "Just like you." But as he left the room, a troubling thought lingered in his mind. Darren wasn't going to give up easily, and the fight was far from over. The courtroom was alive with murmurs as the custody review began. Ethan Wallace sat at the petitioner's table, his posture rigid but composed. Beside him, Alana clutched a small drawing she had created the night before, a simple yet heartfelt depiction of their life together. Ethan glanced at her and offered a reassuring smile. She returned it, albeit nervously, her fingers tightening around the paper. Across the aisle, Darren Hayes sat with his attorney, his demeanor smug and confident. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that Darren was holding on to something, a final trick to tip the scales in his favor. Judge Evelyn Harper entered, silencing the room. Her presence was commanding, her expression unreadable. "Let's proceed," she said, gesturing for the attorneys to begin. Jonathan Reed, Ethan's lawyer, stood first. His voice was calm, measured, and deliberate as he outlined Ethan's commitment to Alana's well-being. "Over the past 6 months, Mr. Wallace has provided Alana with stability, emotional support, and a nurturing environment. She has thrived under his care, academically, artistically, and personally. This case is about more than biology. It's about what is best for Alana." Darren's lawyer, an aggressive woman named Linda Cartwright, countered with an impassioned plea. "While Mr. Wallace's intentions may be well-meaning, the law prioritizes biological family connections. Mr. Hayes, as Alana's uncle, represents her true family and should be given the opportunity to care for her." Ethan's jaw tightened as he listened, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had expected this angle and was ready to fight it. The first to testify was Margaret Avery, the social worker. Her testimony was balanced, but leaned heavily in Ethan's favor. She spoke about Alana's progress since living with Ethan, how she had become more confident, engaged, and expressive. "Mr. Wallace has gone above and beyond," Margaret said. "He has provided Alana with not just a home, but a sense of belonging." Linda pounced during cross-examination. "Miss Avery, would you agree that biological connections are important for a child's identity and well-being?" "Yes," Margaret replied carefully, "but only when those connections are healthy and supportive. In this case, Mr. Wallace has proven to be the healthier and more supportive guardian." Next, Alana's piano instructor, Ms. Carter, took the stand. She spoke passionately about Alana's talent and how Ethan's encouragement had allowed her to blossom. "She's a remarkable young girl," Ms. Carter said, "and it's clear that Mr. Wallace has played a pivotal role in her growth." When Darren took the stand, he attempted to portray himself as a caring uncle who had been unfairly excluded from Alana's life, but Jonathan's cross-examination was relentless. "Mr. Hayes," Jonathan began, "can you explain why you only chose to pursue custody after Camilla's passing?" "I didn't know how bad things were," Darren replied, his voice defensive. "If I had known—" Jonathan cut him off. "But you didn't know," And during Camilla's illness, where were you? Did you offer any financial or emotional support? Darren shifted uncomfortably. I didn't have the means at the time. Yet you suddenly have the means now, Jonathan pressed, holding up a document. This financial statement shows a significant deposit into your account from a trust linked to Victor Lane, a known criminal. Care to explain that? The courtroom fell silent. Darren's face paled, and Linda quickly objected, claiming irrelevance. But the damage was done. Judge Harper allowed the document to remain in evidence, a clear blow to Darren's credibility. The tension in the room reached its peak as Alana was called to testify. She walked to the stand with a mix of determination and nervousness, clutching her drawing tightly. Alana, Judge Harper began, her tone softer than before. Can you tell us about your life with Mr. Wallace? Alana took a deep breath. At first, I didn't know if I could trust him, but he's always been there for me. He listens to me, he cares about me, and he makes me feel safe. She held up her drawing. I made this to show what it's like living with him. It's me and Mr. Wallace at home, playing the piano and cooking dinner. It's not perfect, but it feels like family. Judge Harper smiled faintly. Thank you, Alana. Linda attempted to cross-examine, but Alana's sincerity was unshakable. When asked about Darren, she simply said, I don't know him. He never tried to know me. Jonathan delivered a powerful closing argument, emphasizing Ethan's dedication and the progress Alana had made under his care. This case isn't about technicalities or loopholes, he said. It's about what is best for Alana, and what's best for her is the stability, love, and support she has found with Mr. Wallace. Linda's closing was passionate but hollow, her arguments weakened by the revelations about Darren's financial dealings. After a tense deliberation, Judge Harper returned with her verdict. This court has reviewed the evidence and testimonies presented. While Mr. Hayes has a biological connection to Alana, his actions and associations raised serious concerns about his suitability as a guardian. She turned to Ethan. Mr. Wallace, your commitment to Alana's well-being is evident. However, this court requires continued oversight to ensure her needs are met. I am granting you full custody, with periodic reviews to monitor her progress. The words hit Ethan like a wave of relief. Alana's face lit up, and she threw her arms around him as the courtroom erupted into quiet murmurs. That evening, as they returned home, Alana couldn't stop smiling. Does this mean I get to stay with you forever? She asked. Ethan knelt to her level, his hands on her shoulders. Yes, it does. You're stuck with me now. Alana laughed, a sound Ethan realized he hadn't heard often enough. Good. I like it that way. As she ran off to the piano, Ethan allowed himself a moment to breathe. The fight had been exhausting, but it was worth it. He had kept his promise to Alana, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had truly found his purpose. The courtroom victory gave Ethan and Alana a newfound sense of security. But the path to officially becoming a family was far from over. The legal hurdles of adoption loomed ahead, layered with bureaucratic processes and emotional challenges. For Ethan, it wasn't just about proving his capability to care for Alana. It was about solidifying their bond, ensuring she never doubted her place in his life. One crisp autumn evening, Ethan found Alana sitting on the balcony, a blank piece of paper and pen in front of her. She stared out at the city lights, her expression unreadable. What's on your mind? Ethan asked, as he approached, his voice soft. She shrugged. Margaret said I should write a letter to my mom. You know, to say goodbye. Ethan hesitated before sitting beside her. That's a big step, he said. Are you ready? Alana fiddled with the pen, her gaze still distant. I don't know. It feels weird, like I'm forgetting her if I let go. You're not forgetting her, Ethan said gently. You're honoring her. This letter isn't about leaving her behind. It's about carrying her with you in a new way. For a long moment, Alana didn't respond. Then she nodded and began to write. Ethan didn't read over her shoulder, giving her the space she needed. When she finished, her hands were trembling, but there was a calmness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Do you want to share it with me? Ethan asked. Alana hesitated, then handed him the paper. The letter was simple but deeply heartfelt. She thanked her mother for everything she had done, apologized for not being able to save her, and promised to keep her memory alive. At the end, she wrote, I think you'd like Ethan. He's taking care of me like you always did. I hope that's okay. Ethan felt his throat tighten. This is beautiful, Alana, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Do you think she'd be okay with it? Alana asked, her vulnerability on full display. I think she'd be proud, Ethan replied. Proud of you for being so brave, and proud of the way you're letting love into your life. The adoption process proved to be as complex as Margaret had warned. There were endless forms to fill out, background checks to pass, and interviews with social workers and legal representatives. Ethan threw himself into the process with the same determination he had once reserved for his business ventures. But this wasn't about money or success. It was about family. Margaret remained a steadfast ally, guiding Ethan through the maze of requirements. You're doing well, she said during one of their meetings, but the court will want to see more than financial stability. They'll want evidence of your emotional commitment to Alana. Ethan nodded, his resolve unshaken. She's my priority. Whatever it takes, I'll do it. Not everyone believed in Ethan's ability to be a parent. Critics in the media questioned his motives, painting him as a wealthy bachelor, looking for a PR boost. Even some of his colleagues expressed doubts, their comments dripping with condescension. She's lucky to have you, one executive said during a board meeting, his tone patronizing. But don't you think this is a bit ambitious for someone like you? Ethan met his gaze head on. Caring for a child isn't ambitious, it's human. And Alana deserves every bit of stability and love I can offer. The room fell silent, and the conversation quickly shifted back to business. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he was constantly being judged, as though his dedication to Alana was somehow unnatural. One evening, as Ethan sorted through Camilla's belongings, items Margaret had kept safe for Alana, he discovered a small sealed envelope. The handwriting on the front read, To Alana, when she's ready. Ethan hesitated, debating whether to open it. In the end, he decided it was something Alana needed to see for herself. The next morning, he handed her the envelope. What's this? She asked, turning it over in her hands. It's from your mom, Ethan said. Margaret kept it for you. Alana stared at the envelope, her expression a mix of curiosity and fear. Finally, she tore it open and began to read. Her mother's words were full of love and encouragement, urging Alana to follow her dreams and reminding her that she was never alone. At the end, Camilla wrote, If you find someone who loves you and makes you feel safe, let them in. Don't be afraid to trust again. Tears streamed down Alana's face as she finished the letter. She wanted me to stay with you, she whispered. Ethan pulled her into a gentle hug. She wanted you to be happy, and I'll do everything I can to make sure you are. As the adoption process dragged on, Ethan and Alana's story began to gain traction in the media. A local journalist published an article highlighting their journey, portraying Ethan not as a wealthy executive, but as a man fighting to protect the person he loved most. The story struck a chord, sparking an outpouring of support from the community. Letters and emails flooded in, words of encouragement from strangers who had faced similar struggles, offers of help from advocacy groups, and even messages from other foster children who saw themselves in Alana. One evening, as they sorted through the mail, Alana held up a crayon-drawn picture sent by a young girl named Mia. It showed two stick figures holding hands, with the words, "Family is love," scrawled underneath. "This one's my favorite," Alana said, pinning it to the refrigerator. Ethan couldn't help but smile. The final adoption hearing was scheduled for the following week. Ethan and Alana spent the days leading up to it, preparing for every possible question, every potential challenge. But as the date approached, a familiar unease settled over Ethan. He knew how much was riding on this decision, and he couldn't shake the fear of losing Alana. The night before the hearing, Ethan found Alana at the piano, playing the same melody she had performed at the recital. The music filled the penthouse, carrying a sense of hope and determination. When she finished, Ethan sat beside her. "Nervous?" he asked. "A little," Alana admitted. "But I know we'll be okay. Right?" Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. "Right. We're a team, remember?" "Team Wallace," she said with a small smile. "Team Wallace," Ethan echoed, his heart swelling with pride and love. But as they headed to bed, Ethan couldn't ignore the lingering question in his mind. Would the court see what he saw? Would they understand the bond they had built and the future they were fighting for? The morning of the final adoption hearing dawned clear and bright, but Ethan Wallace felt anything but calm. Dressed in a tailored navy suit, he adjusted his tie for the third time in front of the mirror. In the corner of his room, Alana sat cross-legged on the bed, nervously clutching the stuffed animal Ethan had bought her months ago. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice steady but tinged with concern. Alana nodded, though her grip on the stuffed animal tightened. "What if they say no?" she whispered. Ethan crouched to her level, resting a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "No matter what happens today, we're in this together. But I believe they'll see what we already know. We're a family." Her lips twitched into a small smile. "Team Wallace?" "Team Wallace," Ethan confirmed. The family court was packed with spectators, their whispers creating a soft hum of tension in the room. Reporters had gathered outside, drawn to the story that had captured public attention. Ethan ignored the murmurs, focusing entirely on Alana as they walked to the front of the courtroom. Judge Evelyn Harper presided, her expression as neutral and composed as ever. "This hearing will determine whether Mr. Ethan Wallace's petition for adoption is in the best interest of Alana Hayes," she began. "Let's proceed." Jonathan Reed, Ethan's attorney, rose to deliver his opening statement. "Your Honor, over the past months, Mr. Wallace has demonstrated an unwavering commitment to Alana's well-being. He has provided her with a stable home, nurtured her talents, and given her the emotional support she desperately needed. This adoption is not just a legal formality. It is the foundation of a family." The opposing counsel, representing lingering challenges from social services, argued that Ethan's lack of parenting experience and busy career posed risks. While Mr. Wallace's intentions are commendable, the attorney said, "We must consider whether he can truly provide the long-term stability Alana requires." Margaret Avery took the stand first, her calm and professional demeanor unshaken by the opposition's questioning. "In my career as a social worker, I've seen many children struggle to find a place where they feel safe and valued. Alana has found that with Mr. Wallace. His dedication is clear in every aspect of her life, from her thriving academic performance to her emotional growth. Next, Ms. Carter, Alana's piano teacher, testified about the transformation she had witnessed. Alana came to me as a quiet, guarded child, but she's blossomed under Mr. Wallace's care. Her music reflects her journey. It's filled with resilience and hope. Finally, Ethan himself took the stand. When asked why he wanted to adopt Alana, his answer was simple but heartfelt. She's not just a responsibility to me. She's my family. Alana has brought a joy and purpose to my life that I didn't know I was missing. This adoption isn't about fulfilling some obligation. It's about giving her the love and support she deserves. As the hearing progressed, Jonathan presented the letter from Camilla Hayes as evidence of her wishes for Alana's future. The courtroom fell silent as the letter was read aloud, Camilla's words resonating deeply. To whoever takes care of my little girl, please know that she deserves the world. She deserves someone who will love her, guide her, and help her see how special she is. If you're reading this, I trust you've already shown her that. Thank you for giving her the life I couldn't. Alana's eyes brimmed with tears as the letter concluded, and even Judge Harper's composed expression softened. Ethan reached out, gently squeezing Alana's hand, grounding her in the moment. After hours of deliberation and testimonies, Judge Harper returned to the bench. The courtroom fell into a hushed silence as she began to speak. This case is about more than legal requirements. It's about ensuring that Alana Hayes grows up in an environment where she feels safe, loved, and supported. Mr. Wallace has demonstrated that he can provide such an environment. The testimonies, the evidence, and the heartfelt connection I've observed between Mr. Wallace and Alana leave no doubt in my mind. She paused, her gaze settling on Alana. Therefore, I hereby grant the petition for adoption. Alana Hayes is now, legally and officially, the daughter of Ethan Wallace. The words hung in the air for a moment, before applause erupted from the spectators. Alana turned to Ethan, her face lighting up with pure joy. "It's official?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It's official," Ethan confirmed, pulling her into a hug. "You're stuck with me now." That evening, Ethan and Alana returned home to a surprise celebration organized by Margaret and a few close friends. The once quiet penthouse was filled with laughter, music, and the scent of freshly baked cookies. A banner stretched across the living room read, "Welcome home, Alana." Ethan watched as Alana moved through the room, her face glowing with happiness. She played a song on the piano for their guests, her music capturing the joy of the day. As the final notes faded, she turned to Ethan, her eyes shining. "This is the best day ever," she said. "It's only the beginning," Ethan replied. "We've got so much more to look forward to." As the night wound down and the guests began to leave, Alana handed Ethan a new drawing she had made. It depicted the two of them, standing under a tree, the word family written in bold letters above their heads. "I made this for you," she said, "to say thank you." Ethan felt his throat tighten as he looked at the drawing. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "You've given me more than I could ever give you." Later, as Ethan tucked Alana into bed, she looked up at him with a question. "Do you think my mom knows?" "Knows what?" Ethan asked gently. "That I'm happy," Alana said. Ethan smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I think she knows," he said, "and I think she's proud of you." As he left her room, Ethan felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The journey had been long and challenging, but it had brought them to this moment, a moment of love, trust, and the promise of a brighter future. The adoption hearing felt like a distant memory as Ethan Wallace and Alana Hayes settled into their new reality. The papers were signed, the legal battles over. For the first time, Their lives were defined not by court dates or uncertainties, but by the quiet, steady rhythm of building a life together. The day of the celebratory gathering arrived, a moment Ethan had insisted on hosting for the people who had supported them along the way. The penthouse buzzed with activity as caterers set up tables of food and decorations filled the living room. Alana flitted around the space, adjusting a flower arrangement here, a table setting there. Her energy was infectious, her smile brighter than Ethan had ever seen. "Do you think everyone will come?" she asked, pausing to adjust a balloon arch near the entrance. Ethan smiled. "I think they wouldn't miss it for the world." Margaret Avery arrived first, carrying a neatly wrapped gift. "For Alana," she said, placing it on the table. "It's not every day we celebrate something this special." "You've been a part of this every step of the way," Ethan said. "Thank you." Margaret nodded, her usually stern demeanor softening. "You've earned this, Ethan. Both of you have." By evening, the penthouse was filled with friends, colleagues, and even a few familiar faces from Alana's school. Mrs. Carter, her piano teacher, arrived with a bouquet of lilies for Alana. "For my star pupil," she said, handing them over with a warm smile. "Thank you," Alana said, her cheeks flushing with pride. Ethan found himself at the center of heartfelt conversations throughout the night. Colleagues who had once doubted his decision now offered genuine congratulations. "You've proven us all wrong," one executive admitted. "I've never seen you happier." "It's not about proving anything," Ethan replied. "It's about doing what's right." Meanwhile, Alana basked in the attention, showing off her latest piano piece to anyone who asked. For the first time, she seemed truly at ease, the weight of the past lifting as she embraced her new life. As the evening drew to a close, Ethan called for everyone's attention. "There's something I want to share," he began, holding up a framed drawing. It was the picture Alana had given him after the adoption hearing. The two of them standing under a tree, the word family written above. "This drawing represents everything this journey has been about," Ethan said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "It's about finding each other, learning to trust, and building a life together. Alana has taught me more about love, resilience, and family than I ever thought possible." The room erupted into applause, and Alana beamed as Ethan handed the drawing to Margaret. "I want this to go to the Department of Child Welfare," he said, "as a reminder of what's possible." Margaret nodded, her eyes glistening. "It will hang in my office, where every family that walks in can see it." As the last guests began to leave, Alana approached Ethan with a letter in her hand. "This came today," she said, her voice a mix of excitement and nerves. Ethan opened the envelope, his eyes scanning the letter inside. Then he looked up, his face breaking into a wide grin. "You did it," he said, pulling her into a hug. The letter was from the prestigious music program Alana had applied to. Not only had she been accepted, but she had also been awarded a full scholarship. "I can't believe it," Alana said, her voice trembling. "They really want me." "They don't just want you," Ethan said. "They see what I see. A talented, hard-working, incredible young woman." Later that night, after the guests had left and the house was quiet again, Ethan and Alana sat on the balcony, watching the city lights. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves. Alana leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder, the stuffed animal she still cherished tucked under her arm. "Do you think my mom would be proud of me?" she asked, her voice soft. Ethan placed an arm around her. "I think she's beyond proud, and I think she's smiling down on you right now." Alana nodded, a peaceful expression settling over her face. "I hope so." I want her to know I'm happy. She knows, Ethan said, and so do I. As they sat in the stillness of the evening, Ethan's phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from a national parenting organization, inviting him to speak at an upcoming conference about his journey as an adoptive father. Ethan smiled, his mind already racing with ideas. He glanced at Alana, who had drifted off to sleep against his shoulder, her face serene. This was just the beginning of their story, a story of love, resilience, and the unbreakable bond of family. And as Ethan carried her back to her room, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought them here. The morning light streamed through the windows of the Wallace penthouse, casting golden hues over the living room. Alana sat at the piano, her fingers moving effortlessly over the keys as she rehearsed a piece for her upcoming performance. The melody was a blend of hope and resilience, a reflection of her journey. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, sipping his coffee as he watched her. He felt an overwhelming sense of pride, not just for her talent, but for the courage she had shown every step of the way. "You're going to wow them," Ethan said, breaking the silence. Alana turned, a small smile playing on her lips. "I hope so. It's Carnegie Hall. It feels like a dream." "It's not a dream," Ethan replied. "It's the result of your hard work. You earned this." The day of the performance arrived with a flurry of activity. Ethan and Alana arrived at Carnegie Hall, the grand building buzzing with energy as musicians and their families prepared for the recital. Alana wore a simple but elegant navy dress, her hair pulled back with a silver ribbon. She clutched her sheet music tightly, her nerves evident. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked as they stood backstage. Alana nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. "I'm nervous, but in a good way." "You're going to be amazing," Ethan said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Just play from your heart." When her name was called, Alana stepped onto the stage. The audience was a sea of faces, but her eyes found Ethan in the front row, his encouraging smile grounding her. She sat at the grand piano, took a deep breath, and began to play. The piece was one she had composed herself, a tapestry of emotions that told the story of her life, from the sorrow of loss to the joy of finding a new home. The music soared, filling the hall with its beauty, and when the final notes faded, there was a moment of stunned silence before the audience erupted into applause. Alana stood and bowed, her face glowing with pride. In the audience, Ethan rose to his feet, clapping harder than anyone else. After the performance, Alana was invited to speak. She stood at the microphone, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I want to thank everyone who has supported me," she began. "My teachers, my friends, and especially my dad, Ethan Wallace. He believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. This performance is dedicated to him and to my mom, who I know is watching over me." Ethan felt a lump form in his throat as the audience applauded. He had never expected this journey to change him as much as it had changed Alana, but her words reaffirmed everything he had worked for. That evening, back at the penthouse, Ethan and Alana sat on the balcony, the lights of the city twinkling around them. A framed photo of the two of them, taken after the performance, sat on the table between them. "Do you think this is what my mom wanted for me?" Alana asked, her voice thoughtful. "I think this is exactly what she wanted," Ethan said. "She wanted you to be happy, to feel loved, and to chase your dreams. And you're doing all of that." Alana smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I couldn't have done it without you, and I couldn't have done it without you," Ethan replied. "You've taught me more about love and resilience than I ever thought possible." The weeks that followed were filled with new opportunities. Ethan was invited to speak at a national conference on foster care reform, sharing his story as an adoptive father. His speech, titled Family Beyond Blood, A Journey of Love and Resilience, resonated deeply with the audience. He spoke about the challenges he and Alana had faced, the lessons he had learned, and the importance of creating a system that prioritized the well-being of children over bureaucracy. His words sparked discussions and inspired others to take action, and he found himself becoming an advocate for foster care reform. Meanwhile, Alana's star continued to rise. Her performance at Carnegie Hall led to invitations to other prestigious events, and her compositions began to gain recognition in the music community. Despite her growing fame, she remained grounded, always making time for the people who had supported her. One evening, as they sorted through invitations and emails, Alana paused, holding up a letter. "This one's from a little girl named Mia," she said. "She said my story inspired her to start playing piano." Ethan smiled. "You're making a difference, Alana, just by being you." To celebrate their journey, Ethan and Alana hosted a small gathering at the penthouse, inviting Margaret, Miss Carter, and a few close friends. The evening was filled with laughter, music, and stories about how far they had come. As the night wore on, Alana sat at the piano and began to play a new piece she had composed. The melody was light and hopeful, a reflection of the life they had built together. Ethan watched her, his heart full of pride and gratitude. When she finished, Alana turned to him. "What do you think?" "I think it's perfect," Ethan said. "Just like you." Later that night, as they stood on the balcony, Ethan looked out at the city skyline. "It's funny," he said. "I used to think success was about money and achievements, but now I know it's about moments like this." Alana nodded. "It's about family." "Exactly," Ethan said, placing an arm around her. "And no matter what happens, we'll always have that." As they stood together, the city lights shining around them, Ethan felt a profound sense of peace. Their journey had been filled with challenges, but it had brought them to a place of love, resilience, and unbreakable connection. What a journey, right? Alana and Ethan's story is proof that family isn't always about where you come from, but about who shows up for you when it matters most. Their bond reminds us that love, resilience, and hope can overcome even the toughest challenges. We'd love to hear from you. What part of their journey moved you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's keep this conversation going. Your words matter to us, and who knows, your story might inspire someone else. If this story touched your heart, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We're just getting started, and there are so many more inspiring stories waiting to be told. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for believing in the power of human connection. We'll see you next time.